Judge prepares a 50-year sentence, then uncovers a truth that changes everything. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a space where lives were weighed and fates sealed. Marcus Tate stood at the defendant's table, his wrists cuffed, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of an orange jumpsuit. At 34, he was a man whose life had been shaped by the sharp edges of a small town's prejudice. His dark skin, his quiet strength, and his unapologetic existence as a black man in Willow Creek had always drawn whispers. Today, those whispers had become a roar. Charged with armed robbery, Marcus faced a 50-year sentence, a punishment that felt less about evidence and more about the town's need for a scapegoat. Judge Harold Grayson, a man whose gray hair and deep-set wrinkles spoke of decades on the bench, stared down from his elevated seat. His eyes, usually cold and unyielding, flickered with something unreadable as he shuffled the case files. The prosecution had painted Marcus as a menace, a drifter who'd held up a gas station with a gun no one could find. The evidence was thin, rainy security footage, a shaky eyewitness, and a town eager to convict. Yet the jury, all white, had delivered a guilty verdict in under an hour. The room buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the weight of a community divided. Marcus's mother, Clara, sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles paled. She'd raised Marcus alone, working double shifts at the diner to keep him fed, clothed, and dreaming of a world beyond Willow Creek's narrow streets. She'd taught him to stand tall, to meet hate with dignity. But now, as the judge prepared to speak, her heart pounded with a mother's fear. She knew this town knew its history of quick judgments and slow apologies. Across the aisle, the gas station owner, Tom Hargrove, sat smugly, his testimony the linchpin of the case. He'd sworn Marcus was the man who'd stormed his store, though his story shifted with every retelling. The gavel cracked, silencing the room. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, his voice steady but heavy. Marcus Tate, you have been found guilty of armed robbery. This court sentences you to 50 years in state prison. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her face. Marcus stood motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on a crack in the floor. 50 years. His life erased in a single sentence. But then, a stir at the back of the courtroom. A woman, small and unassuming, pushed through the crowd. She was in her late 60s, her hair a wiry gray, her clothes modest but neat. She clutched a manila envelope, her hands trembling as she approached the bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I have something you need to see." The judge's brow furrowed. Evelyn wasn't on the witness list, wasn't part of the trial. She was a retired schoolteacher, a nobody in Willow Creek's social order. Yet her presence commanded attention. She handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Grayson. The room held its breath as he opened it, pulling out a stack of yellowed papers and a grainy photograph. His eyes widened, then narrowed, his face paling as he read. "Order in the court," Grayson barked, though no one had spoken. He held up a letter, its edges frayed, dated 20 years earlier. "This is a confession," he said, his voice unsteady. "Signed by Daniel Hargrove, Tom Hargrove's late brother." The crowd erupted, voices clashing in confusion and outrage. Tom Hargrove shot to his feet, his face red. "That's a lie," he shouted, but Grayson's gavel silenced him. The letter, written in Daniel's shaky hand, detailed a robbery he'd committed in 2003, an unsolved case at the same gas station. He'd worn a mask, fled with $800, and never been caught. The photograph showed Daniel holding the same type of bag described in Marcus's case, standing outside the station. Evelyn's voice trembled as she explained. She'd found the letter in her attic, tucked inside a box of her late husband's things. Her husband, a friend of Daniel's, had kept it hidden, fearing the consequences of exposing a Hargrove. But Evelyn, haunted by Marcus's trial, couldn't stay silent. The courtroom descended into chaos. Clara wept, her sobs now mixed with hope. Marcus's lawyer, a young public defender named Sarah, seized the moment, demanding a mistrial. Tom Hargrove's face twisted with panic as he shouted denials, but the cracks in his story were now gaping wounds. The judge ordered a recess, his hands shaking as he clutched the letter. Marcus, still cuffed, met his mother's eyes for the first time, a flicker of disbelief breaking through his stoic mask. In the days that followed, the case unraveled. The confession wasn't enough to exonerate Marcus outright, but it cast doubt on everything. Sarah dug deeper, uncovering inconsistencies in Tom's testimony and a history of bad blood between the Hargroves and Marcus's family. Decades ago, Clara had rejected Tom's advances, a slight he'd never forgotten. The robbery charge, it seemed, was less about evidence and more about revenge, a way to punish Marcus for his mother's defiance and his own refusal to bow to Willow Creek's unspoken rules. The twist came not just from Evelyn's letter but from an unexpected ally. Jake, a white gas station clerk who'd been silent during the trial. Jake, barely 20, had worked the night of the robbery. He'd been too scared to speak up, intimidated by Tom's influence in town. But Evelyn's courage stirred something in him. He came forward, admitting he'd seen someone else that night, a figure who didn't match Marcus's build. His testimony, combined with the letter, forced the court to reopen the case. As the retrial loomed, Willow Creek faced its own reckoning. The town's divisions, black versus white, powerful versus powerless, were laid bare. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, with some demanding Marcus's freedom and others clinging to the narrative of his guilt. Clara became a reluctant symbol of resilience, her quiet dignity a rebuke to the town's prejudice. Marcus, still in custody, wrote letters to his mother, promising to keep fighting, not just for himself but for every kid in Willow Creek who'd been judged before they could speak. The retrial ended with Marcus's acquittal. The evidence, now seen in the light of truth, crumbled under scrutiny. Tom Hargrove faced no charges. Daniel's confession was too old. The statute of limitations long expired, but his reputation was shattered. He left town quietly, his store shuttered. Marcus walked free, hugging Clara under a sky heavy with autumn clouds. Evelyn, the unassuming teacher, stood nearby, her eyes bright with tears. She'd never sought the spotlight, but her courage had shifted the course of justice. The town wasn't healed, not fully. Prejudice lingered in quiet corners, in muttered words and sidelong glances. But something had changed. Marcus started a community program, teaching kids black, white, and Unito tell their stories, to claim their worth. Clara joined him, her diner now a gathering place for hard conversations. Evelyn, too, found purpose, speaking at schools about the power of truth. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't just about one man's fight. It was about a community forced to confront its shadows, about the ripple of one brave act. The courtroom, once a place of division, became a mirror, reflecting both the worst and best of human nature. What do you think? Where does justice begin? And how do we heal a divided community?